Shahzada Yaqub Khan was an officer in the Indian Royal Army. The year was 1947, and all the soldiers of the Indian Royal Army were asked to choose between joining the Pakistani Army or the Indian Army. Yaqub Khan had yet to make his decision. He went back home and he walked down the corridors of his ancestral house in Rampur. His mother was sitting in the garden. He went up to her and told her that he had made up his mind. He was going to join the Pakistani army and he was going to move to Pakistan. He asked her if she would move to Pakistan along with him. His mother blessed him but insisted that she would remain in India and this was going to be her home. Within just about a year after this, the two armies, the Pakistani army and the Indian army, faced each other in a battle in Kashmir. Yaqub Khan led his regiment of soldiers and they rode up a hill. And up there, leading a regiment from the Indian side, was Shahzada Yunus Khan. Yunus Khan was Yaqub Khan's brother. Yunus Khan had chosen India as his home, just as his mother had. On the battlefield, both brothers knew duty came before their claims on brotherhood. And so Yunus Khan fired his bullets, and one of the bullets raised against the shoulder of his brother Yaqub. Realizing this, Yunus shouted from where he stood, "Don't worry, Chote, we are soldiers and we did our duty." Yaqub recovered from the wound and he went on to serve the Pakistani army. He later became Pakistan's foreign minister too, and he visited Delhi many years later. And when he did, the two brothers met and embraced each other. However, they had sworn allegiances to two different nations. The India-Pakistan partition of 1947 not only divided the land and its peoples, but even families and siblings. This episode is a brief history of what happened in Kashmir during the India-Pakistan partition, and why is this still a boiling issue in 2025, a full 78 years after the two countries were formed. Hi, you're listening to What's New Today. This is a kids and family podcast about current affairs. I'll narrate the history of Kashmir in three parts. Part 1 will include the stories of what happened in the state of Jammu and Kashmir during the India-Pakistan partition in 1947. Part 2 will contain stories about what happened during the next 60 odd years from 1950 till 2011. And part 3 will contain stories about how the conflict in the state of Jammu and Kashmir has evolved within the last 15 years. To begin the story of Kashmir during India's partition, I must tell you the story of what happened in a distant kingdom called Junagadh in Gujarat. When the British ruled India, they did not directly rule the entire land by themselves. Some parts, like the presidencies of Madras, Bombay, Calcutta, these parts were ruled by the British directly. There were some other parts that were ruled by kings themselves, but of course they had to pay taxes to the British and pretty much had to listen to the rules made by the British. These were called princely states, and there were a little more than 500 of them in all. So in 1947, when the British left India, they handed the parts directly ruled by them to either India or to Pakistan, but the princely states were told that they could do whatever they wanted, which means they could either join India or they could join Pakistan, or, as a few kings had grand dreams, these kingdoms could even be independent countries. Now, in reality, by and large, most of these princely states joined either India or Pakistan at the time of partition in August 1947. Now, Junagadh was one such princely state, and it is in what is modern-day Gujarat. The Nawab of Junagadh, Nawab means ruler, he was Muslim. Now, most of the people who lived in the Junagadh kingdom were largely Hindu. The Nawab decided that he was going to accede his kingdom to Pakistan. So, if you wanted to join Pakistan or India, you would sign a letter of accession, which is what the Nawab did. He signed a letter of accession in September 1947. Immediately after this was made known to the people in his kingdom, there was widespread unrest. People came out on the streets and there was rebellion. Perhaps the Nawab had not anticipated such a strong reaction from his people, and realizing that his life was under threat, he got on his private plane, loaded it up with as much gold and silver as he could, and he fled to Pakistan along with family. An interesting trivia, this Nawab just loved his dogs. He had more than 800 of them. So when he fled, he's supposed to have taken some of his favorite dogs also along with him on that plane. Now back to the kingdom of Junagadh. The king had fled, but not a lot of people knew that the king had fled. The civil unrest in Junagadh was worsening every day. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who was then the leader of India or the acting Prime Minister of India, and Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, who was then the Deputy Prime Minister of India, they were watching the situation in Junagadh unfold with a lot of worry. The Pakistan's Prime Minister was Liaquat Ali Khan, and Pakistan's founder Muhammad Ali Jinnah. They were very clear that Junagadh was going to be very much a part of Pakistan, because they believed that it is the will of the king that mattered and not that of the people. But the conditions inside the state of Junagadh worsened. Then the acting chief minister equivalent of the state of Junagadh, who was then kind of managing the administration of the kingdom because the king had already fled, he sent a telegram to India and invited India to send its soldiers to immediately bring law and order before the situation worsened inside the state of Junagadh. The Indian army immediately went to the state and they brought law and order and some level of peace to the state. Immediately after this, Pandit Nehru wrote to the Pakistan's Prime Minister saying that it is best that we hold a plebiscite, which meant let's let the people vote and decide whether they wanted to join India or Pakistan. Now, Liaquat Ali Khan, the Prime Minister, he refused because he felt that it is the will of the king that mattered and not that of the people. And this is where matters stood for Junagadh in October of 1947. And now let us move our story to the other princely state called Jammu and Kashmir. Now, Jammu and Kashmir was kind of the reverse of Junagadh. This was a state ruled by a Hindu ruler called Maharaja Hari Singh, whereas the majority of the population was Muslim. Now, a little bit of history about the Maharaja and his dynasty, because that will really help us understand how things stood in 1947 in this state. In the early 1800s, the Hindu rulers who belonged to the Dogra dynasty, they were Rajputs, they brought the entire region under their power, and that was mainly because they supported the British in a battle. In exchange, the British told them that we'll gift you the lands of Jammu, Kashmir and Ladakh. And this Maharaja Hari Singh belonged to that Dogra dynasty and he had inherited it from his predecessors. Now, the Maharaja Hari Singh was not exactly a much loved king. He favored the Hindus for many of the jobs in his kingdom, whereas a vast majority of the population was Muslim. He also favored the Hindus whenever land allotment had to be made. So, in effect, what had happened was that most of the Muslims in the kingdom were pretty upset with the king. They had much lesser land and far fewer jobs than the Hindus and the Sikhs, who were much smaller in number. Now, at this time, Jammu and Kashmir had people belonging to many different faiths. While the Muslims were in majority, there was a sprinkling of Hindus, there was a good number of Sikhs, and some number of Buddhists who were a part of the Ladakh region. much before 1947, I'd probably say about 15-20 years before India's independence, a young man from Kashmir, his name is Sheikh Abdullah, who'd been well educated in the Aligarh University, he came back home to Kashmir and he was looking for a job. He found it very hard to get any good government job despite his good qualifications, mainly because the Maharaja favored Hindus. So Sheikh Abdullah became a school teacher. Alongside, he started organizing many groups and small protests against the Maharaja's unfair policies. So sometime in the 1930s and 40s, Sheikh Abdullah would also visit Delhi once in a while. And on one of his visits, he met Pandit Nehru. And the two of them became great friends. They both had very similar beliefs on what kind of society we should create. And they believed in a society where people of all religions should have equal access to opportunities. Now, Sheikh Abdullah came back to Kashmir in the 1940s and he continued his protests against the king. At one point, the Maharaja got so annoyed, he threw Sheikh Abdullah into jail. Nehru was furious. But there was little that Pandit Nehru could do at this time because the Maharaja was still the ultimate authority in Kashmir. And then August 1947 happened. The India-Pakistan partition was on. Maharaja Hari Singh had yet to decide what he wanted to do in terms of whether he wanted to accede to India or to Pakistan, or whether he was going to remain independent. By August 1947, a lot of people had given him many grand ideas, and most of his ministers said, we should keep Kashmir completely independent, just like Switzerland in the middle of Europe. And so Maharaja turned around and told both Pakistan and India that, for the moment, I'm not going to accede to either one of you, but I'm happy to sign a standstill agreement with both countries, which means we'll allow free movement of people and goods across both the borders. So in August 1947, he signed one such standstill agreement with Pakistan. India said, we'll wait and watch, let's see how things go. I'd like to quote something from Ramachandra Guha's India after Gandhi. Pandit Nehru, who was himself a Kashmiri, always wanted Kashmir to be a part of India. Whereas Sardar Patel was inclined to allow the state, which was largely Muslim dominated, to join Pakistan. However, Patel's mind changed in the middle of September when Jinnah accepted the accession of Junagadh to Pakistan. If Jinnah could take hold of a Hindu majority state with a Muslim ruler, why should India not be interested in a Muslim majority state with a Hindu ruler? Now remember, Pakistan had signed a standstill agreement with Kashmir in August 1947, but by September 1947, in just about a month, things started to deteriorate. Pakistan closed its borders. It did not allow movement of any trucks or people from its side. And the situation in Kashmir was a little worrisome because Nehru and Patel were getting news that Pakistan was planning to send infiltrators into the state to stir up a protest. So Nehru immediately wrote to the Maharaja in September, somewhere around the end of September, alerting him to this possible threat. Nehru then suggested that the king should release Sheikh Abdullah from jail. The Maharaja also realized that his own soldiers would be insufficient to meet such a large threat if indeed infiltrators were to come into his state from Pakistan. Now, Sheikh Abdullah by now was much loved by the public, and the Maharaja knew that they would all come together under his leadership, and that would help the Kingdom of Kashmir meet this threat. At least that's what everyone thought. Now, soon after his release from prison, in fact, Sheikh Abdullah made a great speech, and he, in that speech, asked the Maharaja to transfer power to the people of Kashmir. And he said, let the representatives of the people in a democratic Kashmir decide whether the state should join India or Pakistan. A popular government will not be the government of one community, it should be a joint government of the Hindus, the Muslims, and the Sikhs. At this time, a British commander who was posted in Kashmir wrote in one of his own diaries where he observed that the vast majority of the Kashmiris have no strong bias towards either India or Pakistan. While there's nobody here advocating an accession to Pakistan, Sheikh Abdullah's group has been anti Pakistan and pro India. So that may tilt the balance in favor of India. Now, why did he say this? Because Sheikh Abdullah was not very excited about the way things were shaping up in Pakistan because he felt that the idea of Pakistan, a theocratic state, a state dominated by religion, was not working out very well. The Maharaja of Kashmir, he couldn't be bothered by any of these observations. He simply wanted to be an independent country. In fact, in early October, he sent his deputy prime minister to Delhi, and the deputy prime minister went and made this grand statement. Look, Kashmir will remain independent, we will stay on friendly terms with both India and Pakistan, but the only thing that will change our mind is if one side or the other decides to use force against us. Now, those words are very critical because exactly 2 weeks after he said this, several thousand armed men invaded Kashmir from the north. Most of them were Pathans, a tribe from Pakistan, and these tribesmen came in large lorries armed with modern ammunition and guns, and they had ridden along the entire northern border of Pakistan. So it is fairly obvious that the Pakistani army knew exactly what was going on. These tribesmen entered Kashmir from the north and they swiftly rode down the hills and they took control of large towns along the way. Of course, like in the case of any such invasion, they looted, they burned, and they destroyed most of the structures along the way. The British commander on the Pakistani side, who saw what was going on, turned a blind eye and he let these Pathans do as they deemed fit. The Maharaja and his army were unable to keep these infiltrators at bay. Initially, these tribesmen looted and destroyed only those structures that were owned by the Hindus or the Sikhs. But like in many such invasions, even the leadership of such tribes, they lose control over why they were invading the land because they had initially set out to free the Muslims under an oppressive Hindu ruler. However, what really happened was that they began to loot and kill even the Kashmiri Muslims. 48 hours later, the Maharaja realized that the tribesmen were just within hours of attacking his capital, Srinagar, and if that happened, all would be lost. So he immediately sent a telegram to the Indian government for military assistance. I think this was on the 24th of October 1947. And soon after receiving this telegram, the Indian government convened a meeting where Pandit Nehru was there, Sardar Patel was there, the Viceroy, Lord Mountbatten was there, and Sheikh Abdullah, who happened to be in Delhi also on that day, were present. The meeting decided that urgent action was required and a contingent of Indian soldiers should be dispatched immediately. Now, at this time, Mountbatten suggested India should secure Maharaja Hari Singh's accession to India before India committed any of its troops to fight on behalf of the Kingdom of Kashmir. So VP Menon, the representative of the Indian government, immediately flew to Jammu, where the Maharaja was apparently fast asleep. So Hari Singh was woken up and he instantly agreed to sign the instrument of accession to join India. VP Menon flew back to Delhi and within hours, the first plane with troops and armaments left Delhi for Srinagar. More than 100 planes took off from Delhi for the Kashmir Valley within the next few hours, carrying soldiers and supplies, and they brought back many refugees and the wounded. Now, incidentally, not all the planes that flew were part of the Indian Armed Forces. It's interesting that at that time, the Indian Armed Forces did not have sufficient planes. So they borrowed many of the planes from private airlines who immediately offered support. The Indian soldiers who landed in the Kashmir Valley were able to fight off the tribesmen and they secured the Kashmir Valley at first. In fact, Nehru wrote a letter to his sister soon after this happened saying, "If we had vacillated and delayed even by a day, Srinagar might have been a smoking ruin. We got there in the nick of time. We have agreed that the future of Kashmir must be decided by the people, and we have entrusted Sheikh Abdullah with the formation of a ministry." Now, in the meanwhile, in Kashmir, something remarkable was happening. A journalist who was in Kashmir while all this was happening wrote, "I was not prepared to see the incredible sights of unity and fraternity that I saw in Srinagar. The Hindus and the Sikhs move about with complete unself-consciousness amongst the Muslims. They march shoulder to shoulder with them as volunteers engaged in a common task." So the Indian soldiers had landed in the Kashmir Valley, and to some extent they had managed to secure Srinagar, and they started pushing the tribesmen out slowly. Mountbatten decided he was going to be a peacemaker, and he flew from Delhi to Lahore to meet Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Mountbatten told Jinnah that India would give up Kashmir if Jinnah would give up Junagadh. Jinnah said, "No way. India got Kashmir all through fraud." Mountbatten said, "Look, the Maharaja of Kashmir would have never acceded to India if Pakistani citizens, the Pathans, had not raided Kashmir." Jinnah said, "I never sent any of these men to Kashmir, and the Maharaja brought this upon himself after decades of unfair treatment of Muslims." And he said, really, the Pathans from Pakistan all rode out of their own volition to support the Muslims of Kashmir. So basically, neither would Jinnah budge nor would Mountbatten budge, and nothing came out of this conversation. So back to the Kashmir Valley, the Indian armed forces had managed to push the tribesmen back somewhat, but by now, November, December, winter of 1947 had set in. Snow filled the mountainsides, and the movement of troops had to stop on all sides. Both Gandhi and Nehru reposed a lot of faith in Sheikh Abdullah, who they believed was largely secular and he would lead the state well in the meantime. Now, Nehru, in his own head, wanted to bring an end to the military operation in Kashmir because he felt that continuing presence of armed forces in these regions would only bring misery to the common people of Jammu and Kashmir. So, on the advice of Mountbatten, on the 1st January of 1948, Nehru decided to take this issue to the United Nations and ask them to find a peaceful resolution. In hindsight, it was one of the bigger mistakes that India ever made. At the United Nations, Nehru and Pakistan's Prime Minister had multiple conversations, and now Pakistan's Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan insisted that they should hold a plebiscite, which means let the people of Kashmir vote. Now remember, the same man had refused a plebiscite in the case of Junagadh when Nehru had insisted on one. When Liaquat Ali Khan was therefore suggesting a plebiscite, Nehru said, "Okay, we'll hold one." But Liaquat Ali Khan said he was not okay with a plebiscite being conducted when a temporary government of Kashmir was headed by Sheikh Abdullah. Pakistan just did not like Sheikh Abdullah at all. On the other hand, both Gandhi and Nehru felt that Sheikh was the best man to lead the state, and they refused to remove him from the leadership position. So, no way forward at the United Nations so far. February 1948 rolled in. Things in the United Nations were not going India's way. Pakistan had enormous support from both the British and the Americans. In fact, Britain's representative, Sir Philip Noel Baker, argued entirely in favor of Pakistan's position, and India deeply resented the bias that was shown by the UN Security Council. Why America and Britain supported Pakistan in the UN has very little to do with India or its leaders. It had a lot more to do with wider issues in the world. I'll cover these issues in part 2 of this story of what happened in Kashmir from 1950 onwards. But let me wrap up with what happened next as summer rolled into the hills of Kashmir in 1948. The snow melted, the fighting began. India soon discovered that during these quiet winter months, Pakistan had effectively installed a government called Azad Kashmir in some of the parts occupied by the tribesmen, and their army, the Pakistani army, had trained the local soldiers of Azad Kashmir quite well. The Indian soldiers, in the meanwhile, fought off the tribesmen in many other parts. They recaptured many of the high peaks, including the famous peak of Kargil. They took back large parts of Ladakh, including Leh. It was in one of these battles that the brothers Shahzada Yunus Khan from India and Shahzada Yaqub Khan from Pakistan faced each other. This was a story that I was narrating at the very beginning of this episode. India did get back much of the Kashmir territory, but the north and the northwestern parts that had been occupied by Pakistan had yet to be cleared. So, around September or October of 1948, the Indian Army commanders sought permission to move on to reclaim these parts, but permission was denied. I'm not sure why. There are multiple reasons. Perhaps the Indian leadership felt hopeful that a non military solution could be found through talks and negotiations with Pakistan. I don't really know why permission was denied to the Indian armed forces to push further on and reclaim that land. But here's what I can say today in 2025. Little has changed since 1948. Most of the lands that were then occupied by Pakistan, which we refer to today as Pakistan occupied Kashmir, largely remains the same, even as we are recording this episode in 2025. But I will like to end this section, this part of the story, with a very interesting excerpt printed in a Bombay weekly called The Current. This was printed in the year 1948. The Bombay Weekly invited two debaters, one from India and one from Pakistan. And interestingly, both debaters were Muslims. The question that they were both asked to answer was, if the United Nations did succeed to hold a plebiscite today, which way do you think the Kashmiris would vote? Arguing for India was Khwaja Ahmed Abbas. He was a very gifted novelist. Here's what he had to say. He said 1/4 of Kashmir is squarely behind Sheikh Abdullah, and they believe in a secular India and will vote in favor of India. 1/4 of Kashmir is dead against the Sheikh, and they are indoctrinated by the Pakistan ideology and they will vote in favor of Pakistan. Now, the other half are undecided. But I suspect that when the day of the reckoning comes, the memories of the tribesmen from Pakistan, their looting and their brutalities might sway them away from Pakistan. The call for a secular India might be more attractive, and in the end, I think they will vote in favor of India. However, if India wants to be absolutely sure of their votes, the Maharaja needs to be removed from power and Sheikh Abdullah should be allowed to run the government with a free hand. Here's what the debater from Pakistan had to say. His name was Waris Ishaq. I'm not very sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, so please forgive me if I've got it wrong. He's a journalist from Karachi, and here's what he had to say. The pull of religion would ensure a Pakistani victory in Kashmir. Remember, Islam is not just a religion, it is a way of life for us. However, there is only one instance in which people might vote in favor of India if the country really lives up to its call of being secular. I believe that the position of Muslims all over India will always be that of a downtrodden community And I don't think India will truly be secular, and hence, when the day of the voting comes, Kashmiris will vote to join the Islamic Committee of Nations. A plebiscite for Kashmir has never been held. However, in February 1948, a plebiscite was held in Junagadh, where an overwhelmingly large percentage of the population voted in favor of acceding to India, and therefore India consolidated Junagadh as part of the Indian Union. Kashmir, on the other hand, remained conflict-ridden throughout 1947 and 48. And neither India nor Pakistan was decisive enough. As a result, the area has remained conflict-ridden ever since. And the biggest losers have, of course, been the residents of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Coming soon is part 2, what happened in the state of Jammu and Kashmir from the years 1950 till 2011. Many of these are stories of what took place during the Cold War years, the ugly battle between the United States and the Soviet Union that nobody could have imagined would have such a large impact on the state of Jammu and Kashmir. And while the music is still playing, let me give y'all a quick heads up, a piece of promotion from me. I write a weekly newsletter on current affairs, and I write these keeping someone as young as a 10-year-old reader in mind. If you'd like to check it out and read some of the recent pieces, you can search for it on Substack. It is called The Lighter Side. I'm also leaving a link to this in the show notes below. And if any of you has any questions for me about whatever I've narrated so far, please do shoot out those questions to me via email at hello@wsnt.in. See you soon in part 2. Signing off for now, this is Sangeeta, the host of What's New Today.